Welcome back to RPG Lore Dream. Here we talk about the Age from Dragons, from a complete history of Elden Ring's most ancient beings. Before Queen Marika's Golden Order, before the Erdtree stretched its golden roots through the lands between, before even the concept of Elden Lord as we know it existed, there was another power, an older power. The dragons ruled this world, and their dominion was absolute. The Age of Dragons represents a prehistoric era, so ancient that most of its history has been lost to time, preserved only in fragments scattered across crumbling ruins, and whispered through incantations that still crackle with primordial lightning. This was not a time of mercy or diplomacy, but an age when the strongest creatures imaginable held dominion over all creation. The ancient dragons were living mountains of gravel stone, beings whose very scales could twist time itself, whose mastery of lightning was so complete that they didn't merely wield it as a weapon, but embodied its essence as part of their fundamental nature. These weren't the dragons we typically imagine from myth and legend. The ancient dragons of Elden Ring were something far more primal, far more terrifying, and far more magnificent. Their bodies were carved from living rock, each scale a fragment of compressed time and stone that made their hides nearly impervious to harm. When they took flight, the very air trembled. When they roared, mountains cracked. When they called down lightning, the sky itself split open to deliver their wrath. The term ancient dragon carries specific meaning in the lands between. These primordial beings possessed 4 wings, 4 legs, and bodies composed entirely of gravel stone. Their names all ended with the suffix sax, a linguistic marker that identified them as distinct from their lesser descendants. Where later dragons would have fleshy hides and fewer limbs, the ancients were something altogether different, beings that seemed to exist at the intersection of living creature and geological formation. But the Age of Dragons was not simply a time of mindless beasts dominating through brute force. These were intelligent beings, capable of forming societies, hierarchies, and even cults of worship. They built Farum Azula, a royal city that floated among the clouds, a testament to their architectural ambition and their mastery over the fundamental forces of nature. This wasn't just a lair or a nest, it was a capital, complete with temples, fortifications, and monuments to their power. At the heart of this civilization stood one figure who embodied everything the ancient dragons represented. Dragon Lord Placidusax, the first Elden Lord, the ruler whose very presence defined an entire era of history. Under his reign, the dragons didn't just survive, they thrived. They created art, they developed combat techniques, they established traditions that would echo through the ages. The beastmen served them as loyal guardians and warriors, protecting their draconic masters with fanatical devotion. But empires, no matter how mighty, are always vulnerable to forces from within. The greatest threat to a king often comes not from external conquest, but from internal betrayal. And for the Age of Dragons, that betrayal would come from one of their own, a terrible drake known as Baal the Dread, whose challenge to Placidusax's authority would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the downfall of draconic civilization itself. The study of this era requires piecing together information from multiple sources. Item descriptions provide crucial details about individual dragons and their capabilities. The geography of Farum Azula itself tells stories about the scope and scale of draconic civilization. Ancient incantations preserve techniques and knowledge from this lost age. Even the very bones of dragons, scattered across the lands between, serve as archaeological evidence of their former glory and their eventual decline. Understanding the Age of Dragons means grappling with concepts that challenge our normal perception of time and space. The ancient dragons existed partially outside normal temporal flow, their gravel-stone scales literally twisting time around them. This gave them a form of immortality, but it also meant they experienced reality differently than mortal beings. They perceived patterns across vast spans of time, understood cycles that played out over millennia, and made decisions based on perspectives that no human mind could fully comprehend. The relationship between the dragons and their god remains one of the great mysteries of this era. Placidusax served as Elden Lord to an unnamed deity, an outer god whose identity and nature remain unknown. This god granted Placidusax the authority to rule and the power to maintain order among the dragons. But when this god fled, abandoning both Placidusax and the entire Age of Dragons, it created a vacuum that would eventually be filled by the Greater Will and its chosen vessel, Queen Marika. The fall of the Age of Dragons didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual decline, accelerated by Vale's betrayal, but sealed by the arrival of the Golden Order. When the dragons lost their god and their civilization began to crumble, they became vulnerable to the rising human kingdoms led by Marika's forces. The war that followed would reshape the lands between entirely, marking the transition from one cosmic order to another. Yet even in their diminished state, the dragons remained formidable. Their legacy persisted through their descendants, through the knowledge they shared with humanity, through the very landscape they had shaped during their rule. Understanding this legacy requires us to explore each major figure, each significant event, and each lingering consequence of this most ancient of ages. The Age of Dragons represents more than just a historical period. It symbolizes a fundamental truth about the lands between. That power is always temporary, that even the mightiest civilizations eventually fall, and that the echoes of the past continue to shape the present in ways both obvious and subtle. The dragons we encounter in the current age are shadows of what once was, reminders of a time when their kind stood unchallenged at the apex of creation. As we journey through this history, we'll encounter mighty warriors who befriended dragons, terrible betrayers who sought to overthrow them, and tragic figures who were transformed by their hunger for draconic power. We'll explore the intricate systems of magic and ritual that allowed humans to commune with dragon essence. We'll witness the fall of mighty beasts and the rise of new threats, born from the remnants of dragon civilization. This is a story of power and loss, of betrayal and loyalty, of ambition and consequence. This is the story of the Age of Dragons and of how that age came to its inevitable end. But more than that, it's the story of how the past never truly dies, how it continues to influence the present, shaping the world and the beings within it in ways both seen and unseen. The ancient dragons and the age before the Erdtree. To truly understand the ancient dragons, we must first comprehend just how different they were from any other creatures in the lands between. These were not mere animals, no matter how powerful. They were living embodiments of an older order, creatures whose very existence seemed to violate the normal rules of biology and physics. The most striking feature of the ancient dragons was their composition. Unlike their modern descendants with flesh and scales, the ancients were constructed from gravel stone. This wasn't stone covering their bodies as armor, it was the fundamental substance of their being. Each scale was a compressed fragment of reality itself, imbued with temporal distortion that made weapons bounce off and magic dissipate against their hides. The ancient dragon smithing stones, said to be scales from Dragon Lord Placidusax himself, could upgrade weapons to god-slaying levels precisely because they carried this time-twisting property within them. The physical structure of ancient dragons set them apart from all their successors. 4 wings gave them unmatched aerial maneuverability, allowing them to perform complex flight patterns that lesser dragons could never hope to match. 4 legs meant they were equally formidable on the ground, able to tear through enemies with claws while maintaining perfect balance. Their heads were massive, capable of housing brains of formidable intelligence, while supporting jaws powerful enough to crush stone. But perhaps their most defining characteristic was their mastery of lightning. This wasn't the golden lightning that would later be associated with the Erdtree and the Golden Order. This was red lightning, primordial and ancient, the original form of electrical fury that existed before the Greater Will imposed its golden hue upon the world. The ancient dragons didn't merely cast lightning as humans might cast a spell. They were lightning, channeling it through their stone bodies with such precision and power that their attacks could reshape the landscape. The suffix "sax" that marked all ancient dragon names wasn't just a naming convention. It was derived from the Latin word for rock or stone, a linguistic acknowledgement of their fundamental nature. Placidusax, Fortissax, Lansseax, Greyoll. Each name carried within it the recognition of what these beings truly were: living stone given will and terrible purpose. Azula served as the capital of this draconic civilization, and studying its ruins provides crucial insights into how the ancient dragons lived. The city wasn't built to human scale. Its corridors stretched high and wide, designed to accommodate creatures of immense size moving with regal dignity. The architecture incorporated both function and art, with columns carved to resemble draconic forms and bridges, designed to withstand the weight of beings measured in tons. The beastmen who inhabited Azula alongside the dragons had been granted intelligence specifically to serve their masters. Before the Age of Dragons, these creatures were mere animals, operating on instinct alone. But something, presumably the outer god that Placidusax served, elevated them to sapience. They became skilled warriors, capable guards, and devoted servants who would defend the dragons with their lives. Even after the fall of the Age of Dragons, even after millennia had passed, and Azula crumbled into ruin, the beastmen remained at their posts, still guarding chambers that had been empty for untold ages. The social structure of ancient dragon society remains somewhat mysterious, but we can infer certain hierarchies from the evidence available. Placidusax stood at the apex as Dragon Lord and Elden Lord, wielding authority granted by his god. Below him were other mighty ancients like Fortissax, described as the mightiest boulder stone, and Greyoll, whose assault on Leyndell would become the only successful breach of the capital's walls in recorded history. These weren't mindless followers, but powerful beings in their own right, capable of independent thought and action while choosing to acknowledge Placidusax's supremacy. The dragons didn't merely hoard power for themselves. They actively engaged with the world, shaping it according to their will. They transformed landscapes, carving out territories that bore the marks of their presence. They experimented with lightning, developing techniques that would later be preserved as dragon cult incantations. They even attempted to understand and manipulate time itself, achieving a level of chronomantic ability that would never be matched by later civilizations. Their relationship with their outer god defined much of ancient dragon culture. While we don't know the identity of this deity, we know it granted Placidusax his position as Elden Lord and likely provided the framework for draconic society's structure. The god's eventual abandonment of the dragons represents one of the greatest catastrophes in their history, a betrayal that left Placidusax waiting in a storm beyond time for a return that may never come. The concept of the storm beyond time, where Placidusax retreated, deserves special attention. This wasn't simply a hidden location or a temporal anomaly. It represented a fundamental severance from the normal flow of reality, a place where Placidusax could wait without aging, without change, suspended in a moment that stretched into eternity. The fact that a tarnished can eventually find and reach this place suggests that even the most absolute separations are not permanent, that all hidden sanctuaries can eventually be breached. The ancient dragon's relationship with other life forms in the lands between varied. They clearly tolerated and utilized the beastmen, granting them the intelligence necessary to serve effectively. They interacted with the crucible, that primordial form of life from which all living things emerged, though the exact nature of this interaction remains unclear. Some evidence suggests they may have even communed with other ancient beings, creatures who existed in the prehistoric era before human dominance. Their combat capabilities were legendary. Fortissax wielded twin red lightning stakes with devastating effectiveness. Lansseax mastered the lightning glaive, a weapon of pure electrical energy that she could summon and dismiss at will. Greyoll grew so large that his corpse, impaled through the heart and left as a monument in Lansseax, became a permanent feature of the landscape, visible from miles away. These were beings who could fight armies single-handedly, who could reshape battlefields with their breath attacks, who could call down lightning storms that would devastate entire regions. The ancient dragons weren't immortal in the traditional sense. They could be killed, as Godwyn would later prove. But they were functionally ageless, their gravel stone bodies not decaying with time in the way flesh does. They could theoretically exist forever, witnessing the rise and fall of entire civilizations while remaining essentially unchanged themselves. This gave them a perspective on history that no mortal being could match, allowing them to plan in terms of centuries or millennia rather than years or decades. Their intelligence manifested in sophisticated ways. They developed complex incantations that required deep understanding of lightning's fundamental nature. They built cities that demonstrated advanced architectural knowledge. They formed alliances and enmities based on calculations of power and advantage. They even took human forms when it served their purposes, as Lansseax would later demonstrate when she became a priestess of the dragon cult. The red lightning that characterized ancient dragon power carried significance beyond mere color. This was the original, unrefined form of lightning, raw electrical fury unmarked by the golden hue that the greater will would later impose. When humans learned dragon cult incantations, they were learning to channel this ancient power, connecting themselves to forces that predated the current cosmic order. The fact that these incantations worked at all, that humans could learn to wield lightning in the same manner as dragons, suggested that the boundaries between species were not as absolute as they might appear. The fall of the Age of Dragons didn't erase these mighty beings from existence, but it fundamentally altered their place in the world. Where once they ruled absolutely, they became targets of worship, allies to be courted, or enemies to be destroyed. Where once their word was law, they became subjects of human kingdoms and pawns in human conflicts. This transition from rulers to ruled represents one of the most significant shifts in the history of the lands between. Understanding the ancient dragons means recognizing that they represented something humanity could never become, no matter how much power it accumulated. They were beings of pure elemental force, given intelligence and will, creatures whose very existence challenged the notion that flesh and blood represented the pinnacle of life. They were the old order, the power that came before, and their legacy would continue to shape the world long after their civilization had crumbled into myth and ruin. Dragon Lord Placidusax, the first Elden Lord. In the annals of the Lands Between's history, no figure stands more enigmatic or more tragic than Dragon Lord Placidusax. He was the first Elden Lord, a title that would later be associated with Godfrey and others, but which Placidusax held in an age before the Erdtree even existed. His reign defined an entire era, and his fall marked the end of draconic supremacy over the world. Placidusax's physical form was magnificent, even by ancient dragon standards. Originally born with 5 heads, each capable of independent thought and action while working in perfect concert with the others, he represented the apex of draconic evolution. 4 wings gave him unmatched aerial supremacy, while his massive stone body could shake the earth with each footfall. His very presence radiated authority, the physical manifestation of absolute power, united with the will to use it. The title of Elden Lord carried different meaning in Placidusax's time than it would in later ages. He wasn't consort to an Empyrean like later Elden Lords would be. Instead, he served as the divine agent of an outer god whose identity remains unknown to this day. This god granted Placidusax authority over the Elden Ring during the Age of Dragons, allowing him to shape reality according to draconic ideals rather than human ones. His rule wasn't based on conquest or inheritance, but on direct divine mandate. Azula served as his throne room and capital, a city that floated among the clouds, defying gravity through means lost to modern understanding. From this lofty perch, Placidusax could survey his entire domain, watching over the dragons who acknowledged his supremacy and the beastmen who served as his loyal guards. The city's architecture reflected draconic sensibilities, all soaring spaces and massive structures designed for beings who measured their size in stories rather than feet. The Dragon Lord's mastery of lightning exceeded that of any other dragon. He didn't merely wield red lightning, he commanded it in forms that no other being could replicate. His lightning claws could rend reality itself, tearing through space to strike enemies from impossible angles. He could call down massive bolts that exploded with nuclear force, devastating everything within their blast radius. In his most desperate moments, he could even stop time itself, freezing the world while he prepared attacks that would annihilate his enemies when time resumed. But Placidusax was more than just a warrior or a weapon. He was a ruler who maintained order across his entire civilization, resolving disputes between dragons, managing resources, and making decisions that would affect his entire species. The beastmen revered him as a living god, and with good reason. His power was so absolute, his presence so overwhelming, that opposing him seemed not just foolish, but impossible. The outer god that Placidusax served shaped every aspect of his rule. While we don't know this deity's identity, we can infer certain things about it from Placidusax's behavior and the structure of draconic society. It valued order and hierarchy. It granted power based on merit and strength. It allowed its chosen champions significant autonomy, while expecting absolute loyalty in return. This god was the source of Placidusax's authority, the foundation upon which the entire Age of Dragons rested. Then came the catastrophe. Without warning or explanation, Placidusax's god fled. It abandoned him, abandoned the dragons, abandoned the entire cosmic order it had established. We don't know why this happened or where the god went. We don't know if it was driven away by another power, if it lost faith in the dragons, or if it simply grew bored with the world it had shaped. All we know is that one day the god was gone, and Placidusax was left alone. The Dragon Lord's response to this abandonment reveals the depth of his devotion. Rather than accepting the loss and moving forward, rather than seeking a new god or attempting to rule without divine mandate, Placidusax retreated to a storm beyond time itself. There, suspended in a moment outside normal temporal flow, he waited. He still waits. Despite millennia passing in the world outside, despite his civilization crumbling and the Age of Dragons ending, Placidusax remains in that storm, faithful to a god who may never return. This decision to wait rather than adapt demonstrates something crucial about Placidusax's character. He wasn't a pragmatist who would accept whatever cosmic order came next. He was a true believer, devoted to his god with such absolute loyalty that existence without that god seemed meaningless. His retreat wasn't cowardice or strategic withdrawal. It was a statement of faith, a refusal to acknowledge any reality, except the one where his god ruled and he served as its champion. The storm beyond time itself deserves examination. This wasn't merely a hidden location or a pocket dimension. It represented a fundamental severance from causality, a place where past, present, and future blurred into a single eternal moment. Time moved differently there if it moved at all. Placidusax could observe the outside world, but couldn't be truly reached by it, existing in a state somewhere between stasis and awareness. Even in this self-imposed exile, Placidusax didn't entirely abandon his role. He continued to grant blessings to his followers, his power reaching out from the storm beyond time to touch those who remained loyal to the old ways. These blessings weren't merely mechanical buffs or magical enhancements. They represented genuine divine intervention, the Dragon Lord's will manifesting in the world despite his physical absence. The wounds Placidusax carries tell their own story. Of his original 5 heads, only 2 remain. 3 were torn away in battle, presumably during his confrontation with Baal the Dread. These weren't clean amputations or surgical removals. They were violent, traumatic injuries that left ragged stumps and scarred flesh. The fact that Placidusax survived such devastating damage speaks to both his incredible resilience and the terrible cost of his conflict with Baal. His wings show similar scarring, tattered and torn from battles fought across eons. His stone body bears cracks and fractures that would have killed lesser dragons. These injuries never healed, perhaps because they were inflicted before his retreat to the storm beyond time, or perhaps because the wounds themselves exist partially outside normal causality. Regardless, they serve as permanent reminders of the conflicts that marked the end of the Age of Dragons. The relationship between Placidusax and Baal deserves particular attention, as it represents one of the defining conflicts of the prehistoric era. Baal wasn't just another dragon challenging the Dragon Lord's authority. He was a betrayer, a drake who had perhaps served Placidusax before turning against him. Their battle shook the foundations of the world, and its aftermath would shape draconic civilization for all time. When Placidusax established Dragon Communion as revenge against Baal and his descendants, he demonstrated strategic thinking that went beyond simple combat prowess. Rather than attempting to hunt down Baal personally, or sending armies of dragons to destroy him, Placidusax created a system that would turn humans into hunters of drakes. He weaponized human ambition and greed, offering them power in exchange for slaughtering Baal's descendants. This showed a sophistication in understanding human nature that belied the common perception of dragons as mere beasts. The fact that some ancient dragons sided with Baal rather than Placidusax reveals fault lines within draconic society that we might otherwise never have suspected. These traitors wielded branching red lightning, a variant on the standard red lightning used by loyal dragons, marking them as distinct and different. We don't know what motivated their betrayal, whether they genuinely believed in Baal's cause or simply saw an opportunity to advance their own positions by backing what they thought would be the winning side. Placidusax's gravel stone scales became artifacts of immense power after being separated from his body. The ancient dragon. Smithing stones aren't merely hard substances suitable for weapon enhancement. They're fragments of Placidusax himself, carrying within them the temporal distortion that characterized his entire being. Weapons upgraded with these scales can harm gods precisely because they operate partially outside normal time, striking at vulnerabilities that would otherwise remain protected. The Old Lord's talisman depicts Placidusax in his prime, showing all 4 of his remaining heads and his wings folded in repose. This talisman extends the duration of sorceries and incantations, a mechanical effect that represents something deeper. It channels a fragment of Placidusax's power, that ability to stretch moments and manipulate time that characterized his greatest achievements. Wearing the talisman means carrying a piece of the Dragon Lord's temporal mastery. When a tarnished eventually finds their way to Placidusax's storm beyond time, the Dragon Lord responds, as he has always responded to threats, with overwhelming force. But there's something tragic about this encounter. Placidusax isn't defending treasure or territory. He's defending his right to wait, his chosen position as eternal guardian of a god that abandoned him. The battle that ensues isn't conquest or murder. It's an intrusion into a private grief that has lasted longer than some civilizations. The fight itself showcases Placidusax's full arsenal. He teleports through reality, appearing and disappearing in bursts of red lightning. He calls down massive electrical bolts that crater the ground. He summons storms of energy that fill the entire battlefield. In his desperation, he even deploys his ultimate technique, stopping time itself to to prepare an attack so devastating that it can obliterate even the most prepared warrior. This isn't the attack of a beast fighting for survival. It's the calculated response of a master warrior who has forgotten more about combat than most beings will ever learn. Yet despite his power, despite his mastery, despite everything he represents, Placidusax can be defeated. A sufficiently skilled Tarnished can weather his attacks, learn his patterns, and eventually bring him down. This defeat represents more than just another boss fight. It marks the final end of the Age of Dragons, the death of the last true remnant of that era. When Placidusax falls, an entire cosmic order dies with him. His death, or perhaps his final defeat and return to waiting, doesn't come with revelation or vindication. His god doesn't return to save him. The other dragons don't rally to his defense. He faces his end alone, as he has waited alone, loyal to the last to a deity who will never acknowledge his faith. This tragic devotion defines Placidusax more than any of his achievements or victories. He was the Dragon Lord who never stopped believing, even when belief became indistinguishable from delusion. The legacy of Placidusax extends far beyond his personal story. Every Dragon Communion incantation carries an echo of his power. Every ancient dragon that still survives does so in a world shaped by his decisions. Every system of draconic magic or temporal manipulation owes something to techniques he pioneered or perfected. He was the first Elden Lord, and though his reign ended long ago, its influence persists in ways both obvious and subtle. Understanding Placidusax means grappling with questions about faith, loyalty, and the nature of divine mandate. What does it mean to serve a god who has abandoned you? What worth does power hold when it cannot achieve the one goal that matters? How do you maintain identity and purpose when the entire cosmic order that gave you meaning has dissolved? These aren't merely abstract philosophical questions. They're the concrete reality of Placidusax's existence, the central tragedy that defines every moment of his endless vigil. The Dragon Lord represents the old order at its most absolute and its most tragic. He was power incarnate, ruling through divine right and personal might. But he was also ultimately powerless to prevent his god's departure or to halt the decline of everything he had built. His story is one of devotion leading to isolation, of strength insufficient to protect what mattered most, of loyalty that became indistinguishable from loneliness. He waits still in his storm beyond time, the first Elden Lord, eternal guardian of a throne that will never be filled. Baal the Dread, the great betrayer. If Placidusax represents the pinnacle of ancient dragon nobility and power, then Baal the Dread embodies everything dark and terrible about draconic ambition. He is the betrayer, the challenger, the drake who dared assault the Dragon Lord himself and survived the encounter. His story is one of catastrophic conflict, of a battle so destructive that its consequences reshaped the entire course of draconic history. Baal wasn't an ancient dragon in the traditional sense. He was a drake, a lesser form of dragon, lacking the four limbs and gravelstone composition that characterized the ancients. This distinction is crucial because it means Baal rose from a position of inherent inferiority to challenge the mightiest being of his age. He wasn't merely ambitious, he was revolutionary, seeking to overturn an entire cosmic order through personal force. His appearance reflects both his draconic heritage and the terrible price of his ambition. Baal is massive, easily one of the largest dragons still active in the lands between, a black and red beast whose very presence radiates menace. But he's also horrifically maimed. His wings are shredded, torn to useless tatters that can barely support flight. One leg has been entirely ripped away, leaving him to crawl and drag himself across the ground. Most tellingly, two of Placidusax's severed heads remain embedded in his back, their stone jaws still locked in place after all these millennia, a permanent reminder of the Dragon Lord's fury. The name, Baal the Dread, carries multiple implications. Baal itself is a corruption of Baal, meaning destructive or evil force. The Dread suggests not just that he is fearsome, but that he is the embodiment of fear itself, a creature whose very existence threatens everything around it. Some scholars suggest the name references Balerion the Black Dread from other fantasy works, and given George R.R. Martin's involvement in Elden Ring's creation, this connection seems intentional. The conflict between Baal and Placidusax remains shrouded in mystery regarding its origins. We don't know what drove Baal to challenge the Dragon Lord. Perhaps he genuinely believed he would make a better ruler. Perhaps he sought revenge for some perceived slight. Perhaps he simply craved power for its own sake, seeing Placidusax's position as something to be taken rather than earned. Whatever his motivation, Baal's challenge represented an existential threat to the entire structure of ancient dragon society. The battle itself must have been apocalyptic. Two beings of immense power, each capable of reshaping landscapes with their attacks, fighting without restraint or mercy. Placidusax wielded his mastery of time and lightning, calling down destruction that could atomize lesser beings. Baal responded with fire and lightning of his own, combining elements in ways that created entirely new forms of devastation. The clash of their powers would have been visible from miles away, a storm of light and fury that made the earth itself tremble. Neither combatant achieved clear victory. Placidusax lost 3 of his 5 heads, wounds so severe that even his ancient regenerative abilities couldn't heal them. But he succeeded in mortally wounding Baal, tearing off one of the drake's legs and shredding his wings beyond repair. More than that, Placidusax's remaining heads managed to lock onto Baal's back, their jaws clamping down with such force that even after the Dragon Lord's retreat, even after millennia had passed, those severed heads remained embedded in Baal's flesh. The aftermath of this battle shaped everything that followed. Baal, too, wounded to continue challenging Placidusax and too proud to submit, fled to what would later become the Land of Shadow. There, atop the jagged peak, he made his lair, surrounded by his descendants, the drakes who inherited his rebellion, if not his power. Some ancient dragons, for reasons that remain unclear, chose to follow Baal into exile rather than remaining loyal to Placidusax. These traitors wielded branching red lightning, a variation on standard dragon lightning that marked them as distinct from their loyal brethren. Placidusax's response to Baal's escape was calculated and cruel. Rather than pursuing Baal personally or sending armies of ancient dragons to finish the job, the Dragon Lord established dragon communion. He had his followers, including the ancient dragon Fortissax, take human forms and teach mortal warriors how to consume dragon hearts, specifically the hearts of drakes descended from Baal. This created a self-perpetuating cycle of violence, where humans would hunt drakes for power, consuming their hearts to gain draconic abilities while slowly transforming into magma worms themselves. This strategy revealed Placidusax's sophistication as a ruler and strategist. He understood that humans could be motivated by the promise of power, that they would willingly risk transformation and death for the chance to wield abilities beyond their natural limits. By turning human ambition into a weapon against Baal's lineage, Placidusax ensured that even in his absence, even during his vigil in the storm beyond time, the hunt for Baal would continue. Baal's existence in the Land of Shadow became a focal point for those seeking to prove themselves against the ultimate draconic challenge. Drake warriors would make pilgrimages to the jagged peak, hoping to be the one who finally slayed the dread and claimed his heart. None succeeded until the arrival of the Tarnished, though many died trying. Their bones likely still litter the approaches to Baal's lair, monuments to ambition and failure. The Drake's personality, such as we can discern it, seems dominated by rage and pride. He doesn't hide or seek peace. He remains atop the jagged peak, visible to all who would challenge him, as if daring any would-be dragon slayers to test themselves against him. His behavior during combat reflects this aggressive pride. He doesn't retreat or surrender. He fights with the same fury that drove him to challenge Placidusax, throwing everything he has at opponents with the knowledge that he has already survived the worst battle imaginable. Egon, the Drake warrior whose obsessive hatred of Baal defines his entire character, provides insight into the Drake's impact on those who face him. Egon encountered Baal and was broken by the experience, losing the use of his legs and becoming consumed with revenge. His famous rant against Baal, delivered when summoned to fight the Drake one final time, captures the visceral terror and hatred that the dread inspires. "Curse you, Baal! I hereby vow, you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake warrior, and I, Egon, your fear made flesh. Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon. But I will riddle with holes your rotten hide, with a hail of harpoons, with every last drop of my being." This isn't the calculated anger of someone pursuing a legitimate grudge. It's the obsessive fury of someone who has been traumatized beyond recovery, who has made revenge the entirety of their identity because they have nothing else left. That Baal can inspire such obsession speaks to the psychological impact of facing him, to the way his mere presence can break even experienced warriors. The fight against Baal showcases abilities that blur the line between dragon and something more. In his first phase, he fights primarily with fire breath and physical attacks, using his remaining 3 limbs to devastating effect despite his disabilities. But when pressed, when his health drops below a certain threshold, something remarkable happens. Baal manifests wings of pure red lightning, spectral constructs that allow him to take flight despite his actual wings being useless tatters. This ability suggests connection to the Crucible, that primordial wellspring of life from which all things emerged, and raises questions about Baal's true nature. Some scholars speculate that Baal might be an omen equivalent among dragons, born with supernumerary features, including extra horns and the ability to regenerate lost body parts through crucible magic. This would explain how he can manifest new wings and how he has survived wounds that should have been fatal. It would also provide context for his rebellion, as omens in human society are often marginalized and persecuted, and Baal might have faced similar discrimination among ancient dragons. The heart of Baal, obtained after defeating him, is unlike any other dragon heart in the game, where normal hearts can be consumed at Dragon Communion altars to learn incantations. Baal's heart functions differently. It can only be offered at the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion in the Land of Shadow, and doing so grants access to the most powerful Dragon Communion incantation available, Baal's Tyranny. But the heart's description warns that even after being consumed, it continues to resist, its fire burning within the consumer until it eventually consumes them entirely. This persistent resistance characterizes Baal even in death. He refuses to truly die, refuses to be conquered even when physically defeated. His will continues to fight through his heart, ensuring that anyone who claims his power will eventually pay a terrible price for their ambition. It's fitting that the betrayer's legacy is itself a form of betrayal, a power that turns against those who wield it. Baal's presence in the Land of Shadow raises questions about the relationship between that hidden realm and the main lands between. Did Marika specifically seal Baal away when she created the Land of Shadow, recognizing him as too dangerous to leave accessible? Or did Baal simply flee there seeking refuge from the forces hunting him? The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes, with Baal choosing the Land of Shadow as his sanctuary, and Marika choosing not to disturb him there. The drakes who inhabit the Land of Shadow, descended from Baal's lineage, exhibit characteristics distinct from other dragons. They're more aggressive, more territorial, and seemingly more intelligent than typical dragons. They fight in coordinated groups, using tactics that suggest genuine strategic thinking. This intelligence might be inherited from Bale himself, a reflection of the cunning required to survive his battle with Placidusax and establish a new, draconic lineage. The broader impact of Bale's betrayal on dragon society cannot be overstated. It fractured the ancient dragons' unity, dividing them into loyalists and rebels. It provided the impetus for dragon communion, which would eventually lead to the creation of magma wyrms and the corruption of countless warriors. It demonstrated that even the mightiest rulers could be challenged, sowing seeds of doubt that would contribute to the eventual fall of dragon civilization. Most importantly, it showed that the Age of Dragons wasn't invulnerable. That internal conflict could be as dangerous as external threat. When the Tarnished finally defeats Bale, it represents more than just another boss victory. It's the resolution of a conflict that has spanned ages, the final act in a drama that began before human civilization even existed. Egon's death following Bale's defeat is symbolically appropriate, as if the Drake warrior's entire purpose was fulfilled in that one moment of revenge. The challenge has been met, the betrayer has fallen, and an ancient wrong has been righted. Yet even in death, Bale leaves a complicated legacy. He was a betrayer, yes, but also a survivor. He was a tyrant, but also a challenger of an unjust cosmic order. He was a monster, but also a being who refused to accept limitations placed upon him by accident of birth. His story raises uncomfortable questions about power, authority, and the right to rebel against established order. Was Bale truly evil, or was he simply ambitious? Did he betray Placidusax, or did he challenge an unjust system? These questions have no easy answers. The dread represents the dark side of draconic nature, the capacity for betrayal and destruction that exists alongside their nobility and power. He shows that dragons are not mere beasts or simple symbols, but complex beings capable of making choices that reshape their entire civilization. His legacy persists not just in his descendants, but in the very structure of dragon communion, and in the warnings about draconic power corrupting those who seek it too eagerly. Bale the Dread was the betrayer, the challenger, the survivor, and ultimately the cautionary tale written in blood and stone across the ages. The ancient dragon's siblings, Fortissax and Lansseax. Among the ancient dragons who survived into the age of the Erdtree, two figures stand out for their unique relationships with humanity and their tragic fates. Fortissax and Lansseax were siblings, both mighty ancient dragons who would come to play crucial roles in the transition from dragon dominance to human ascendancy. Their stories intertwine with some of the most significant events in the Lands Between's history, from the war against the dragons to the Night of Black Knives and beyond. Fortissax was known as the mightiest boulder stone, a title that spoke to both his composition and his formidable power. Even among ancient dragons, beings already renowned for their stone-like hides and incredible strength, Fortissax stood out. His mastery of red lightning was particularly sophisticated, wielding twin lightning stakes that he could hurl with devastating accuracy or use as melee weapons in close combat. These weren't crude bolts of electrical force, but refined techniques that demonstrated centuries of practice and refinement. During the war between the ancient dragons and the forces of Leyndell, Fortissax found himself facing Godwyn the Golden, son of Queen Marika, and one of the greatest warriors of the age. This was no random encounter, but rather a climactic confrontation between two champions, each representing their entire civilization's hopes and ambitions. The battle raged across the final battlefield of the conflict, with Godwyn fighting to the last, pushing himself beyond normal limits in his determination to prevail. Against all odds, Godwyn defeated Fortissax, but rather than finishing off the fallen dragon or claiming his heart as a trophy, Godwyn made a different choice. He extended his hand in friendship to his fallen foe, offering peace instead of death. Fortissax, perhaps recognizing something in Godwyn that transcended species or loyalty, accepted this offer. This moment of reconciliation between former enemies would reshape the entire conflict, effectively ending the war and establishing a new relationship between dragons and humanity. The friendship between Godwyn and Fortissax gave rise to the ancient dragon cult in the capital. This wasn't merely a political arrangement or strategic alliance. It was a genuine cultural exchange, with dragons sharing their knowledge of lightning and humanity offering acceptance and worship in return. Lansseax, Fortissax's sister, took this exchange further by assuming human form to serve as a priestess of the cult, teaching knights the incantations that would allow them to wield draconic lightning. This transformation ability reveals a crucial aspect of ancient dragon nature that we might otherwise overlook. They weren't bound to a single form, but could reshape themselves as needed. The fact that they chose to do so, that they valued their connection with humanity enough to literally change themselves to accommodate it, suggests a level of flexibility and open-mindedness that stands in stark contrast to the image of dragons as prideful and rigid. Lansseax's role as a priestess allowed her to interact with individual humans in ways that would have been impossible in her draconic form. She taught incantations, yes, but she also formed genuine relationships. She loved Vike the Dragon Spear more than all the other knights, forming a bond that transcended teacher and student. This love must have been complicated by the species barrier, by the differences in lifespan and perspective, but it was genuine nonetheless, enduring until Vike's fall to the frenzied flame made further connection impossible. The ancient dragon cult existed as a unique synthesis of draconic power and human worship. The cult's incantations, particularly those involving red lightning, were technically heretical from the Golden Order's perspective. Yet they were permitted within Leyndell because the dragon's lightning was imbued with gold, making it compatible enough with the Erdtree's ideology to coexist. This political compromise allowed dragon worship to persist within the capital's walls, though the cult operated partially in shadow, with some of its more powerful techniques taught only in secret. The cult's members gained not just power, but perspective. Learning to channel dragon lightning required understanding reality from a draconic viewpoint, perceiving time and space in ways humans normally couldn't. Knights who mastered these techniques found their entire worldview altered, seeing possibilities and patterns that had previously been invisible to them. This cognitive shift made them more effective warriors, but also more alienated from purely human concerns. When the Knight of Black Knives came and Godwyn was assassinated, the consequences rippled through both human and draconic communities. Godwyn's death was partial, his soul destroyed while his body remained alive, creating the horrifying condition known as the Prince of Death. This wasn't a clean death, but a corruption, a spreading blight that threatened to consume everything it touched. The death blight that emanated from Godwyn's corpse was anathema to life itself, rot given dark purpose. Fortissax's response to his friend's death reveals the depth of their bond. The ancient dragon didn't abandon Godwyn or accept his fate. Instead, Fortissax fought. He struggled to stave off the death blight, battling the corruption that spread through Godwyn's enormous corpse like a living thing. This wasn't a fight that could be won through strength or skill, but Fortissax fought it anyway, day after day, year after year, refusing to surrender his friend to the darkness. The corruption eventually won. Death blight proved too pervasive, too fundamental, for even an ancient dragon to resist indefinitely. Fortissax himself became infected, transformed from a noble, ancient dragon into a lich dragon, a creature of death rather than life. His stone body retained its power but became tainted, crackling with death lightning instead of the pure red lightning he had once commanded. His consciousness, warped by corruption, lost its clarity, leaving only the base drive to defend Godwyn from any who would approach. The transformation into a lich dragon represents a special form of tragedy. Fortissax didn't simply die fighting the death blight. He became part of what he fought against, his noble resistance perverted into corruption. Yet even in this corrupted state, his fundamental purpose remained unchanged. He still defended Godwyn, still fulfilled his role as friend and protector, even though he had become something monstrous in the process. When the Tarnished eventually confronts Lich Dragon Fortissax in Deeproot depths, the battle occurs within a deathbed dream provided by fire. This liminal space exists somewhere between life and death, a fitting arena for facing a being who has become trapped between those two states. Fortissax fights with all his remaining power, deploying death lightning that inflicts not just damage, but the deathblight itself. His attack patterns retain sophistication, suggesting that some fragment of his original intelligence survives beneath the corruption. Defeating Fortissax feels less like victory and more like mercy, killing. The player isn't conquering an enemy or claiming a prize, but rather ending the suffering of a noble being who has fought beyond endurance for a friend who can never truly be saved. The fight's tragic nature is reinforced by the setting and circumstances, everything about the encounter designed to evoke melancholy rather than triumph. Lansseax's fate, while less overtly tragic than her brother's, carries its own sorrows. She survived the war and continued serving as a priestess of the ancient dragon cult, teaching knights and forming bonds with humans. But her love for Vike ended in disappointment when he succumbed to the frenzied flame. We don't know Lansseax's ultimate fate, whether she still lives in human form somewhere in the lands between, or whether she too has fallen to some unknown catastrophe. The incantations associated with both siblings preserve their techniques and their memory. Fortissax's lightning spear allows users to summon and hurl the same red lightning stakes he once wielded. Lansseax's glaive creates a weapon of pure lightning that can be wielded in melee combat. Death Lightning, the corrupted form of Fortissax's power, paradoxically channels the golden lightning that Godwyn once wielded, creating a fusion of human and draconic power marked by death itself. These incantations aren't merely combat tools. They're fragments of the siblings themselves, preserved echoes of their power and presence. Learning them means connecting with Fortissax and Lansseax across time and space, channeling their techniques and, in some small way, continuing their legacy. The broader significance of Fortissax and Lansseax lies in what they represent. The possibility of genuine cooperation between species, the tragedy of corruption destroying noble purpose, and the complex emotional lives of beings often dismissed as mere monsters. They weren't simple creatures operating on instinct. They were individuals capable of friendship, love, sacrifice, and suffering. Their stories humanize the ancient dragons in ways that pure displays of power never could. Their relationship with the dragon cult also demonstrates how ancient draconic knowledge could be integrated into human society. The techniques they taught didn't just make knights more powerful. They changed how those knights perceived reality, granting them glimpses of the temporal and spatial awareness that dragons possess naturally. This cognitive expansion had profound effects, creating a class of warriors who operated according to different rules than their peers. The siblings' fates also illustrate the different ways that dragons could relate to the changing world. Fortissax chose direct personal connection, forming a genuine friendship with Godwyn and remaining loyal to that friendship beyond reason or survival. Lansseax chose cultural integration, taking human form and teaching from within human institutions. Both approaches had value, and both ultimately led to tragedy, but they represented genuine attempts at adaptation rather than mere surrender. The fact that ancient dragons could take human form raises fascinating questions about their fundamental nature. Were they truly stone creatures who could temporarily assume flesh? Were their draconic forms the disguise and their human forms the truth? Or did they exist in some liminal state, capable of being both dragon and human with equal authenticity? The game never fully answers these questions, leaving room for interpretation and speculation. What we can say with certainty is that Fortissax and Lansseax represent the best possibilities of ancient dragon character. They were powerful, yes, but they were also capable of growth, adaptation, and genuine emotional connection. They didn't simply demand worship or conquest. They engaged with humanity as equals, sharing knowledge and forming relationships that benefited both species. That such noble beings came to tragic ends speaks to the fundamental darkness underlying the Lands Between's history. The legacy of these siblings persists in multiple forms. Every knight who wields dragon cult incantations channels a fragment of their power. Every story about the friendship between Godwyn and Fortissax reinforces the possibility of interspecies cooperation. Every tragic tale about Fortissax's corruption serves as a reminder of how dedication and loyalty can survive even the most complete transformation. They were siblings, warriors, teachers, and friends, and their impact on the Lands Between extends far beyond their individual strength. The War of the Ancient Dragons. The conflict between the ancient dragons and the forces of the Golden Order represents one of the most significant turning points in the history of the Lands Between. This wasn't a minor skirmish or border dispute. It was a war for supremacy, a struggle to determine which cosmic order would dominate the world. The war's origins, conduct, and resolution shaped everything that followed, creating the political and magical landscape that defines the current age. The war's catalyst was an act of unprecedented aggression. Lansseax, a great ancient dragon, assaulted the royal capital of Leyndell. This attack represented the only time in recorded history that Leyndell's walls were breached. The scale of Lansseax's assault can be understood by examining his corpse, which remains impaled through the heart in the capital, a monument so massive that it can be seen from miles away. This dragon was larger than any other we encounter in the game, easily dwarfing even Greyoll or Placidusax. We don't know what motivated Lansseax's attack. Was it a response to some provocation by the Golden Order? Was it a desperate attempt by dragons to prevent their inevitable displacement? Was it simply territorial aggression from a being who recognized no authority but strength? The game provides no clear answer, leaving the question of who truly started the war unresolved. But regardless of motivation, Lansseax's assault marked the beginning of open conflict between dragons and the emerging human civilization. The Golden Order's response was swift and comprehensive. Under Queen Marika's leadership, human forces mobilized to counter the dragon threat. This wasn't merely defensive action, but a campaign of conquest aimed at breaking dragon power permanently. The Tree Sentinels, elite warriors who served as the Erdtree's defenders, donned armor designed to resemble dragon bodies, adopting their enemies' forms as both practical protection and psychological warfare. This adoption of draconic imagery represents an interesting dynamic. Rather than rejecting everything about dragons, the Golden Order sought to appropriate their power and symbolism. The Tree Sentinels became dragon-like in appearance, mimicking their enemies while maintaining human identity. This cultural appropriation reflected the Golden Order's broader strategy of absorbing and assimilating elements from defeated civilizations, rather than simply destroying them. The war itself must have been catastrophic. Ancient dragons possessed power that could reshape landscapes. Their lightning strikes could devastate armies. Their physical strength could demolish fortifications. Yet the Golden Order had numbers, organization, and divine backing from the greater will. The conflict likely raged across multiple battlefields, with each side claiming victories and suffering defeats in a grinding war of attrition. The ancient dragons fought not just as individuals, but as a coordinated force. They protected Placidusax and Farum Azula, forming what the flavor text describes as a wall of living rock. This defensive strategy made sense given their composition and capabilities. Rather than pure offense, they focused on creating unbreakable defenses that would outlast any human assault. This approach might have succeeded had the war remained purely military in nature, but the war's resolution came not through complete conquest, but through individual combat and subsequent reconciliation. The clash between Godwyn the Golden and Fortissax became the decisive moment. Godwyn's victory demonstrated that humans could defeat even the mightiest ancient dragons in single combat, but his choice to befriend rather than kill his fallen foe created an entirely different path forward. This friendship offered both sides an alternative to mutual destruction. The ancient dragon cult emerged as a compromise that satisfied both parties' needs. Dragons gained acceptance within human civilization, protection from further hunting, and opportunities to pass their knowledge to new generations. Humans gained access to draconic power through dragon cult incantations, and the prestige of having ancient dragons as allies rather than enemies. This wasn't complete victory for either side, but rather an arrangement that allowed both to survive. The political implications of this resolution rippled through both societies. Within dragon civilization, it marked acceptance that the age of dragons had ended and that survival required adaptation. Some dragons embraced this new reality, like Fortissax and Lansseax. Others likely resented it, seeing cooperation with humans as capitulation. The fact that some ancient dragons had already sided with Baal suggests that unity among dragons had already fractured before the war even began. For human civilization, the resolution established an important precedent. The Golden Order could absorb and incorporate powerful entities rather than destroying them. This approach would be repeated with other groups and powers throughout Marika's reign. The cult's existence within Leyndell, while technically heretical given its use of red lightning, demonstrated that the Golden Order valued practical power over ideological purity. The technical and magical developments sparked by the war had lasting impact. Human study of dragon lightning led to deeper understanding of electrical forces and temporal manipulation. Knights who learned dragon cult incantations gained perspectives that transcended normal human limitations. The weapons and armor developed during the war, particularly those incorporating dragon imagery or actual dragon parts, became symbols of prestige and power. The war's geographical impact can still be observed across the lands between. Battlefields became memorialized locations. Granzax's corpse permanently altered Leyndell's skyline. Dragon lairs and nesting grounds, some dating to the war, dot the landscape as reminders of where ancient powers once fought for supremacy. These locations serve not just as environmental features, but as historical markers, commemorating conflicts that shaped the world's current configuration. Farum Azula's slow crumbling, which had begun long before the war, may have accelerated during the conflict. The ancient capital's structural integrity had been maintained by draconic power and the presence of Placidusax. With the Dragon Lord in retreat and many ancient dragons killed or assimilated into human society, the city lost the constant maintenance it required. The fact that it still floats at all speaks to the incredible engineering and magic that went into its construction. The beastmen who served the dragons found themselves in a peculiar position following the war. Many remained in Farum Azula, continuing to guard their posts despite the absence of their masters. Others may have sought new purposes or masters, though the game provides little information about their fate. Their continued presence in the ruins suggests that their loyalty transcended practical concerns, that they served the dragons not from compulsion, but from genuine devotion. The war's conclusion didn't immediately doom the dragons to extinction. Many survived, adapting to the new reality in various ways. Some, like Fortissax and Lansseax, integrated into human society. Others retreated to remote locations, establishing lairs where they could exist independently of human interference. A few, like Placidusax, chose complete withdrawal rather than accepting their diminished status. But the war marked a fundamental shift in cosmic order. The Age of Dragons had definitively ended, replaced by the age of the Erdtree. Dragons who survived did so on human terms, their power acknowledged but contained. The Greater Will's dominance over the world became absolute, with dragons reduced from rulers to subjects, from independent powers to allied forces within a human-led cosmic order. This transition created a category of what we might call post-war dragons, beings born or maturing after the conflict, who had never known a world where their kind ruled absolutely. These dragons would experience reality differently than their ancient predecessors, understanding themselves as powerful, but ultimately subject to an order they didn't create or control. This shift in dragon psychology and culture represents one of the war's most profound long-term effects. The war also established patterns that would repeat throughout the Lands Between's history. Powerful entities would challenge the Golden Order, be defeated militarily, and then be absorbed into the existing structure rather than destroyed. This happened with the Fire Giants, with the Carrions, with numerous other groups and individuals. The war against the ancient dragons provided the template for this approach to conflict resolution. From a military perspective, the war demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of draconic power. Individual dragons were nearly unstoppable, capable of defeating entire armies through personal might, but they lacked the organizational sophistication and numerical advantages that human forces possessed. The quality of individual combatants couldn't overcome quantity and coordination, especially when that quantity came backed by divine mandate and magical support. The war's legacy, in terms of magical knowledge transfer, cannot be overstated. Dragon cult incantations represent some of the most powerful techniques available to humans. The ability to call down lightning, to channel draconic power, to manipulate electrical forces, these weren't merely weapons, but tools for understanding fundamental aspects of reality. Every knight who learned these techniques carried forward a piece of ancient dragon knowledge, ensuring that even if all dragons died, their power would persist through human practitioners. The psychological impact on both sides shaped their subsequent behavior and culture. Dragons who survived carried memories of being supreme rulers, creating a tension between their proud past and diminished present. Humans who fought in the war and won carried confidence that no power was too great to challenge, that even ancient cosmic orders could be overthrown through sufficient force and determination. Both perspectives would influence events for generations to come. The war between the ancient dragons and the Golden Order stands as a pivotal moment when one cosmic order displaced another. It wasn't simply conquest or genocide, but a complex transformation where elements of the old order were preserved within the new one. Understanding this war means understanding how power shifts in the Lands Between, how old hierarchies give way to new ones while maintaining certain continuities. The ancient dragons lost their dominance but not their significance, and that paradox defines much of their role in subsequent history. Elder Dragon Greyoll, mother of all dragons. In the desolate reaches of Caelid's dragon barrow, surrounded by her offspring and afflicted by the scarlet rot, lies Elder Dragon Greyoll. She's described as the mother of all dragons, or at least the mother of many modern dragons, a progenitor whose bloodline extends throughout the Lands Between. Her presence in the game is unique, massive beyond comprehension, yet unable to fight directly, a tragic figure whose very existence raises profound questions about the nature of dragons and the costs of their long history. Greyoll's size is staggering. She dwarfs every other dragon in the game, even eclipsing Placidusax in sheer mass. When standing, she would measure hundreds of feet in height, a living mountain whose body has merged partially with the earth beneath her. Her wingspan, were she still capable of flight, would cast shadows over entire regions. This immense size speaks to her age and power, suggesting she predates even the ancient dragons or represents an evolutionary divergence from them. The description of Greyoll as the mother of all dragons requires careful interpretation. In Japanese, the text calls her a great mother of dragons, rather than the mother of literally all dragons. This distinction matters because it suggests she's a progenitor of a particular lineage rather than the universal source of all draconic life. Most likely, she's the mother of the lesser dragons and drakes that populate the current lands between, creatures descended from her bloodline rather than from the ancient dragons who served Placidusax. Her current condition is pitiful. Greyoll lies motionless in Dragon Barrow, unable to move or fight directly. Whether this immobility stems from age, injury, the scarlet rot that afflicts the region, or simple exhaustion from supporting her massive body, remains unclear. She can still roar, a sound so terrible that it weakens nearby enemies. But this defensive ability is her only remaining power. Everything else, all her strength and vitality, has drained away across the centuries. 6 lesser dragons surround Greyoll, serving as her protectors and guardians. These are red-eyed flying dragons, descended from her bloodline, who attack anyone who approaches their mother. The life bond between Greyoll and her children creates a unique mechanical interaction, each child's death dealing significant damage to Greyoll herself. Kill all 6 offspring, and Greyoll dies as well, her life so intertwined with theirs that their destruction ensures hers. This life bond suggests something profound about draconic reproduction and family structure. Greyoll's connection to her children isn't merely social or emotional, but fundamental, woven into her very existence. She doesn't just care for her offspring, she's literally linked to them through magical or biological means. This represents a form of parental devotion taken to an absolute extreme, where a mother's life becomes inseparable from her children's survival. The scarlet rot's presence in the region complicates Greyoll's situation. We know that after the Battle of Aeonia, when millennia bloomed and unleashed the scarlet rot against Radon, dragons fled to the northern reaches of Caelid to escape the corruption. Dragon Barrow became their refuge, a plateau elevated enough to avoid the worst of the rot. Yet Greyoll herself seems afflicted, her massive body unable to flee as her more mobile children could. The Battle of Aeonia's aftermath turned Caelid into a hellscape of rot and decay, transforming a once verdant region into a wasteland of crimson corruption. Dragons who had made their homes there faced a choice: flee to higher ground or succumb to the rot. Greyoll's immobility meant she couldn't flee, forcing her to endure the corruption while her children protected her from both the rot's effects and any who might seek to exploit her weakened state. Encountering Greyoll presents players with an interesting moral dilemma. She poses no direct threat, lying helpless and surrounded by protectors who only attack when approached. Killing her yields an enormous amount of runes, 50,000 at base, making her an attractive target for players seeking quick progression. But doing so means slaughtering a helpless being who has done nothing to provoke attack, raising questions about the morality of such an action. Many players have debated whether killing Greyoll constitutes mercy or murder. Those arguing for mercy point to her suffering, trapped in an immobile body afflicted by rot with no hope of recovery. Death would end her pain, releasing her from an existence that has become nothing but endurance. Those arguing its murder note that Greyoll still lives, still protects her children, still serves a purpose despite her limitations. Killing her eliminates the mother of dragons from the world purely for personal gain. The method most players use to kill Greyoll adds another layer to this ethical quandary. Rather than fighting her children and letting the life bond kill her naturally, many players sneak behind the dragons and simply attack Greyoll directly, inflicting bleed damage that slowly drains her massive health pool. This takes several minutes of repeatedly hitting a defenseless creature, a process that feels less like combat and more like execution. Greyoll's roar, the incantation obtained by defeating her, transforms the caster into a dragon-like form to emit a terrible roar that weakens enemies. The flavor text emphasizes her mountain-like presence, describing her as something that dwarfed all who stood before her. This isn't empty hyperbole, but literal description. Greyoll was and is a living mountain, a creature so massive that normal perceptions of scale become meaningless. The fact that Greyoll exists at all in the current age raises questions about dragon longevity and reproduction. If she's truly ancient enough to be the mother of most modern dragons, she must be phenomenally old, potentially predating even the age of dragons itself. This longevity suggests that elder dragons, even those without gravel-stone composition, can achieve something close to immortality through sheer size and vitality. Her children's devotion to her demonstrates a depth of familial bond unusual in dragon behavior. Dragons are often portrayed as solitary and territorial, yet these 6 remain with their mother, protecting her despite her inability to reciprocate or even acknowledge their efforts. This behavior suggests that dragon family structures, at least in Greyoll's lineage, involve long-term parental bonds that endure far beyond offspring maturation. The geographical distribution of dragons across the lands between likely traces back to Greyoll's bloodline. From Limgrave to Liurnia, from mountaintops to consecrated snowfield, dragons of various types populate the landscape. Many, if not most, of these creatures probably descended from Greyoll, carrying her genetic legacy across the world. Understanding her means understanding the origin of much of the draconic presence in the current age. Greyoll's relationship to ancient dragons like Placidusax remains ambiguous. Was she contemporary with the Dragon Lord, perhaps serving as a breeding female during the Age of Dragons? Or did she emerge later, after the ancient dragons' decline, filling a reproductive niche they left vacant? The game provides no definitive answer, leaving players to speculate about her place in draconic genealogy. The name Greyoll itself suggests something about her nature. Grey refers to her coloring, the ash-white scales that cover her body, distinctly different from the various hues of her descendants. Oll might be related to old, emphasizing her age, or might derive from other linguistic roots. Regardless, the name captures both her appearance and her status as an elder, being whose existence spans epochs. Fort Faroth, located near Greyoll, provides an interesting contextual detail. This fort stands as a human construction in dragon territory, suggesting some level of historical interaction between the 2 species in this region. Whether the fort was built to observe Greyoll, to defend against her children, or for entirely unrelated purposes remains unclear. Its presence implies that humans have known about Greyoll's location for a considerable time. The metaphysical implications of Greyoll's life bond with her children extend beyond mere game mechanics. If a mother dragon's life force is distributed among or connected to her offspring, it suggests that dragon reproduction isn't simply biological, but involves magical or spiritual components. This would explain why killing the children weakens and ultimately kills the mother, as each death severs a connection that literally sustains her existence. Greyoll's ultimate fate, whether at player hands or through some other mechanism, represents the passing of an era. She is potentially the last of the truly ancient dragons still living in a conventional sense, as Placidusax exists in a storm beyond time. Her death marks the end of a bloodline that shaped draconic presence across the lands between, leaving her descendants as the final echoes of her existence. The tragedy of Greyoll lies not in dramatic betrayal or heroic sacrifice, but in slow decline and inevitable death. She didn't fall in glorious battle or make noble choices that led to her doom. She simply grew old, grew massive beyond mobility, and found herself trapped in a dying land, unable to flee or fight. Her story is one of natural tragedy, the kind that comes not from evil or ambition, but from the simple passage of time and the accumulation of misfortune. Yet even in this diminished state, Greyoll maintains dignity. She doesn't beg or plead. She simply exists, protected by her children, enduring with whatever strength remains. This stoic acceptance of fate characterizes her presentation, turning what could be merely pathetic into something almost noble. She was the mother of dragons, and she remains so even at the end. The lesser dragons and their adaptations. The lesser dragons, also known simply as dragons or drakes, represent the modern descendants of the ancient draconic bloodlines. These creatures lack the gravel stone composition and four-limbed structure that characterized the ancients, instead possessing fleshy hides, two legs, and wings that serve as their primary appendages. Despite these differences, lesser dragons remain formidable creatures, each adapted to specific environments and circumstances across the lands between. Flying Dragon Greyoll serves as many players' first encounter with draconic power. This dragon makes its lair in a Greyoll lake in Limgrave, and its appearance is often sudden and dramatic, the beast swooping down to attack players who wander too close to the dragon-burnt ruins. A Greyoll's behavior suggests territoriality, rather than mindless aggression, as it specifically defends the lake and its surrounding area from intruders. The dragon-burnt ruins near Greyoll's lake contain an interesting detail. Wandering nobles who chant Greyoll's name, praying that the dragon will burn them to ash. This behavior suggests a form of worship, or at least fearful reverence for the dragon. Whether these nobles genuinely revere Greyoll or simply hope that acknowledgement will spare them from attack remains unclear. Their presence transforms Greyoll from a simple territorial predator into something more complex, a creature that inspires religious or quasi-religious devotion. Greyoll's combat capabilities typify lesser dragon strengths and weaknesses. The dragon breathes fire with devastating effect, creating lingering flames that deny entire areas to opponents. Its aerial mobility allows hit-and-run tactics, swooping down to attack before retreating to the sky. But it's also vulnerable when grounded, its wings becoming liabilities rather than assets. This pattern of strength in air and relative weakness on ground repeats across most lesser dragons. Flying Dragon Greyoll, encountered on the Farum Great Bridge, demonstrates how environmental factors can dramatically alter dragon encounter difficulty. Greyoll is essentially identical to Greyoll in appearance and capability, but the narrow bridge provides far less room for maneuvering. Players can't simply dodge to the side or create distances easily, making Greyoll's attacks proportionally more dangerous. This shows that lesser dragons, while individually powerful, depend heavily on environmental advantages to pose maximum threat. The dragon's naming patterns provide subtle insights into their characteristics. Names like Greyoll and Greyoll follow different linguistic patterns than the sax ending of ancient dragons, marking them as distinct even before considering their physical differences. These names often have harsh, guttural sounds, perhaps mimicking the roars and growls that dragons produce in their natural state. Decaying Lansseax represents a particularly tragic example of lesser dragon. Adaptation. This dragon has been afflicted by scarlet rot, the same corruption that devastated Caelid, and its body shows obvious signs of decay. Yet Lansseax survives, even thriving in its own twisted way, using the rot as a weapon. Its breath attack inflicts scarlet rot build-up rather than simple damage, turning corruption into offensive capability. Lansseax's positioning near the Cathedral of Dragon Communion is no accident. The dragon specifically stations itself at the entrance, attacking anyone who attempts to approach the altar. This behavior suggests awareness of Dragon Communion's purpose and hatred for those who would participate in it. Lansseax hasn't forgotten what Dragon Communion means for dragons, even though the rot has warped its body and possibly its mind. The relationship between lesser dragons and Dragon Communion creates interesting dynamics throughout the lands between. These dragons are simultaneously prey and power source, creatures hunted for their hearts, yet feared for their strength. Those who successfully kill lesser dragons and consume their hearts gain draconic powers, but they also paint targets on themselves for other dragons who might seek revenge or simply recognize them as threats. Lesser dragons demonstrate surprising intelligence in their behavior patterns. They establish territories and defend them consistently. They adapt combat tactics based on opponents and environment. Some, like Lansseax, show signs of long-term planning and strategic positioning. This intelligence distinguishes them from mere beasts, elevating them to sapient or near-sapient status despite their lack of speech or obvious cultural development. The reproduction of lesser dragons remains mysterious. We know Greyoll is described as the mother of many dragons, suggesting she birthed multiple generations of lesser drakes. But we don't observe dragon mating behavior or child rearing in the game. Do dragons lay eggs? Are they born live? Do parents care for their young or abandon them immediately? The game provides no clear answers to these basic biological questions. Lesser dragons' relationship with ancient dragons varies considerably. Some lesser dragons may descend from Baal and his brood, carrying the traitor's bloodline into the current age. Others might trace ancestry to Greyoll or other elder dragons. A few could even be degraded forms of ancient dragons themselves, beings who lost their gravel stone composition through unknown processes. Without clearer genealogical information, we can only speculate about specific lineages. The distribution of lesser dragons across different environments shows adaptive radiation, with different populations developing traits suited to their specific habitats. Plains-dwelling dragons like Greyoll adapted for open sky hunting and territory defense. Bridge-dwelling dragons like Greyoll learn to exploit confined spaces. Rot-afflicted dragons like Lansseax integrated corruption into their very being. This diversity suggests that lesser dragons, despite sharing a common ancestor or ancestral species, have diverged significantly based on environmental pressures. Combat with lesser dragons follows predictable but challenging patterns. Their fire breath forces constant movement and awareness of positioning. Their aerial attacks require precise timing to dodge or block. Their physical strikes carry enormous force, capable of killing unwary opponents in single hits. Yet they're also vulnerable to specific strategies, bleed damage being particularly effective due to their massive health pools and the percentage-based nature of bleed buildup. The hearts of lesser dragons serve as currency in dragon communion, physical manifestations of draconic power that can be consumed to gain abilities. These hearts continue beating even after being removed from the dragon's body, suggesting that draconic life force persists beyond conventional death. The hearts are described as grotesque yet beautiful, capturing the paradoxical nature of dragon biology, terrifying and alien, yet possessing undeniable aesthetic appeal. Lesser dragons' role in the current ecosystem of the lands. Between remains significant despite their reduced status compared to ancient dragons. They're apex predators in most regions they inhabit, capable of driving away or killing most other creatures. They shape human settlement patterns, with areas of dragon activity becoming no-go zones for normal travelers. They serve as symbols of power and danger, their presence marking an area as particularly hazardous. The fact that lesser dragons haven't been hunted to extinction despite dragon communion's prevalence suggests either impressive reproductive rates or sufficient defensive capability to deter most hunters. Probably it's both. Dragons reproducing successfully enough to replace losses while remaining dangerous enough that only skilled warriors dare hunt them. This balance maintains dragon population at sustainable levels while ensuring they remain serious threats. Lesser dragons lack the temporal manipulation abilities of their ancient cousins, but they compensate with raw physical power and adaptability. A lesser dragon might not be able to stop time or twist reality through its scales, but it can still devastate armies through fire breath and physical attacks. This makes them relevant military forces despite their reduced mystical capabilities. The relationship between lesser dragons and humanity varies by individual and region. Some dragons, like Greyoll, seem content to be left alone, attacking only when their territory is invaded. Others, like Lansseax, actively position themselves to interfere with human activities. A few dragons have even been domesticated or allied with human forces, though these represent exceptions rather than norms. Understanding lesser dragons means recognizing them as distinct from their ancient predecessors, while acknowledging the connections between them. They're degraded in some senses, lacking the gravel stone hides and mystical powers of the ancients. But they're also adapted to current conditions, surviving and even thriving in a world where their kind no longer rules, but must instead coexist with human dominance. This adaptation represents its own form of success, ensuring draconic continuation even as draconic civilization has ended. The glintstone dragons, Smaragd and Adula. Among the lesser dragons that populate the lands between, a particular subset stands out for their unique adaptation and symbiotic relationship with magical forces. The glintstone dragons, most notably Smaragd and Adula, have integrated themselves with glintstone magic in ways that fundamentally alter their nature and capabilities. These dragons represent the intersection of draconic power and human sorcery, creating hybrid beings of devastating potential. Smaragd, the glintstone dragon, makes his lair on an island near the Academy of Raya Lucaria, specifically guarding a corpse that holds the Academy glintstone key. His presence there is no accident. According to item descriptions, Smaragd was a devourer of sorcerers, consuming mages who ventured too close, or who he actively hunted. The glintstones these sorcerers used gradually corrupted his body, transforming him from a normal dragon into something fundamentally different. The transformation process reveals something crucial about dragon biology and adaptability. Dragons don't merely consume food for sustenance, they absorb and integrate what they eat into their fundamental being. When Smaragd ate sorcerers and their glintstones, he didn't simply digest them, he incorporated them, allowing glintstone to permeate his body until it became part of his essential nature. This suggests that dragon flesh is mutable in ways that other creatures are not, capable of adopting properties from consumed materials. The visible signs of Smaragd's transformation are striking. His body shows crystalline growths, particularly concentrated around his head and wings. These aren't external decorations, but integrated structures. Glintstone that has become part of his physical form. His eyes glow with magical light rather than the natural luminescence of normal dragons. Most dramatically, his breath weapon has changed from fire to glintstone breath, magical energy that inflicts intelligence-based damage rather than fire damage. Smaragd's combat style reflects his magical corruption. He can cast glintstone stars, conjuring magic projectiles that track and pursue targets. His breath weapon creates lingering magical fields rather than simple fire. He even demonstrates the ability to use crystalline formations as weapons, creating magical spikes that erupt from the ground. These techniques place him somewhere between dragon and sorcerer, a hybrid creature wielding powers from both traditions. The question of whether Smaragd's transformation was voluntary or involuntary remains unanswered. Did he deliberately consume sorcerers to gain magical powers, understanding that their glintstones would transform him? Or did he simply follow normal dragon predatory behavior, with the corruption being an unintended consequence? His positioning near Raya Lucaria suggests at least some level of deliberate interaction with the Academy, but whether this represents hunting ground selection or something more calculated isn't clear. Glintstone Dragon Adula represents a different model of dragon magic integration. Where Smaragd became corrupted through consumption, Adula seems to have formed a deliberate alliance with Ranni the Witch, serving as her protector and companion. Adula's relationship with Ranni goes beyond simple employment or contractual obligation. The dragon demonstrates genuine loyalty, appearing to defend Ranni at crucial moments and showing signs of emotional investment in her welfare. Adula's first appearance comes during Ranni's questline, when the dragon confronts the player in the Three Sisters area. This encounter is temporary, with Adula flying away after taking a certain amount of damage rather than fighting to the death. The dragon's willingness to retreat suggests intelligence and tactical thinking, recognizing when continuation of combat would be disadvantageous. It also demonstrates restraint, as Adula could presumably fight to exhaustion, but chooses not to. The true battle with Adula occurs at the Cathedral of Manus Celis, after the player has progressed significantly through Ranni's questline. Here, Adula fights without restraint, deploying the full arsenal of glintstone dragon abilities. The dragon's mastery of magic rivals Smaragd's, with glintstone breath creating deadly zones and magical projectiles filling the battlefield. But Adula also wields a unique technique, the Adula's Moonblade, a sword of pure magical ice that the dragon summons in mid-air. This Moonblade represents the pinnacle of glintstone dragon technique. It isn't merely magical breath or projected energy, but a formed weapon of tremendous power, combining cutting force with frostbite buildup. The fact that Adula can create and wield this weapon while in flight demonstrates extraordinary precision and control, integrating human-style swordsmanship with draconic aerial combat. The relationship between Adula and Ranni raises fascinating questions about dragon psychology and loyalty. Why would a dragon serve a human, especially given that dragons were once rulers of the lands between? What does Ranni offer that compels Adula's service? The game suggests that their bond is genuine rather than coerced, implying mutual respect or even affection between dragon and witch. One possibility is that Adula recognizes Ranni's cosmic ambitions and chooses to support them, seeing in Ranni's plans for a new order something preferable to current circumstances. Another possibility is that Adula and Ranni share a longer history, with the dragon having known Ranni for years or decades before the game's events. The bond might even be personal, rather than ideological, a genuine friendship transcending species boundaries. The glintstone corruption that affects both Smaragd and Adula seems to grant increased magical capability while retaining draconic physical power. This creates beings more dangerous than pure dragons or pure sorcerers, combining the strengths of both while minimizing weaknesses. A glintstone dragon can devastate opponents at range with magic, while still possessing the claws and teeth to destroy enemies in melee combat. The Moonlight Altar, where glintstone dragons roost, provides insight into their social behavior. Multiple glintstone dragons inhabit this area, suggesting either a colony or at minimum multiple individuals drawn to the same location. The presence of the Cathedral of Manus Celis and other magical structures implies that glintstone dragons are attracted to areas of high magical concentration, possibly feeding on ambient magical energy to sustain their corrupted forms. The ecology of glintstone dragons raises interesting questions. Do they still need to eat normal food? Or has their magical corruption altered their metabolic requirements? Can they reproduce? And if so, are their offspring also glintstone corrupted? Are there glintstone dragons elsewhere in the lands between? Or are Smaragd and Adula unique examples of this hybridization? The fact that both Smaragd and Adula are encountered as hostile opponents, despite their clearly exceptional intelligence and capabilities, speaks to the tragic nature of dragon existence in the current age. These are beings of immense power and sophistication, yet they're reduced to obstacles for players to overcome, their deaths necessary for progression or resource acquisition. They could potentially be allies or mentors, but the structure of the world leaves them only as enemies. The magical techniques unique to glintstone dragons have been preserved as incantations and sorceries available to players. Adula's Moonblade can be learned and replicated, though human practitioners lack the aerial mobility and physical presence that make Adula's use of it so devastating. Glintstone Breath similarly becomes available, allowing humans to channel the same magical draconic fusion that defines these creatures. The existence of glintstone dragons demonstrates that the boundary between dragon and other forms of power isn't absolute. Dragons can integrate magic, absorbing and adapting it to their nature. This adaptability suggests that dragons as a species possess remarkable flexibility, capable of evolving and transforming in response to new circumstances. It also raises the possibility that other hybrid forms exist or could be created. Dragons that have integrated different power sources in the way glintstone dragons integrated sorcery. Comparing Smarag and Adula reveals different paths to similar ends. Smarag achieved his transformation through consumption and corruption, a process that seems involuntary, or at least unconscious. Adula's transformation appears more deliberate, possibly the result of study or direct instruction from Rani or other sorcerers. Both ended up as glintstone dragons, but their journeys to that state reflect different philosophies and circumstances. The strategic positioning of glintstone dragons near major magical sites suggests intelligence and purpose beyond simple territoriality. Smarag guards the Academy glintstone key, effectively controlling access to Raya Lucaria. Adula defends the Cathedral of Manus Cellars, protecting one of Rani's most important locations. These aren't random lair selections, but deliberate choices to position themselves as gatekeepers, forcing anyone who would access these sites to first overcome draconic guardians. The future of glintstone dragons remains uncertain. Are Smarag and Adula the beginning of a new draconic subspecies, one that will continue evolving and adapting? Or are they anomalies, temporary aberrations that will disappear once these specific individuals die? The game provides no clear answer, leaving the glintstone dragon's ultimate significance to players' imagination. What we can say with certainty is that glintstone dragons represent the apex of draconic adaptation to the current age. They haven't merely survived the transition from Age of Dragons to Age of the Erdtree. They've evolved, integrating new power sources and developing new capabilities. They prove that dragons aren't static creatures locked into unchanging forms, but dynamic beings, capable of radical transformation when circumstances demand it. In this way, they embody hope for draconic continuation, even as traditional draconic civilization crumbles into history. The Frost and Rot Dragons. Beyond the glintstone dragon's magical adaptation, other lesser dragons have embraced or been afflicted by elemental forces that fundamentally alter their nature. Two particularly notable examples are Borealis, the freezing fog, and the scarlet rot-afflicted dragons of Caelid, each representing a different form of environmental integration and the costs that come with such transformation. Borealis, the freezing fog, inhabits the mountaintops of the giants, a frozen wasteland where eternal winter has settled following the Golden Order's war against the fire giants. This dragon hasn't merely adapted to the cold, it has become cold itself, transforming from a fire-breathing creature into something that embodies ice and frost. The name Borealis references the aurora borealis, or northern lights, atmospheric phenomena associated with polar regions, while freezing fog describes the dragon's most distinctive ability. Borealis's breath weapon has completely inverted from typical draconic fire. Instead of flames, the dragon exhales a fog of intense cold that inflicts frostbite buildup on anyone caught within it. This mist doesn't simply damage but actively freezes opponents, reducing their stamina recovery and eventually inflicting devastating frostbite status. The fog itself becomes a battlefield hazard, lingering areas where normal movement becomes dangerous and prolonged exposure proves fatal. The transformation from fire to frost represents a fundamental alteration of draconic nature. Fire has been intrinsic to dragon identity across countless mythologies and fantasy settings. Borealis's abandonment of fire for ice signals a complete environmental adaptation, the dragon reshaping its very essence to match the frozen landscape it inhabits. This suggests remarkable biological or magical plasticity, dragons able to fundamentally alter their elemental affinity when circumstances demand it. We don't know whether Borealis was born with frost breath or adapted it over time. Did this dragon migrate to the mountaintops and gradually transform, its fire breath weakening and eventually inverting into frost? Or was Borealis born in these frozen reaches, inheriting frost affinity from parents who had already adapted? The game leaves this question unanswered, though the fact that Borealis is a named individual rather than a species suggests this transformation might be unique. The mountaintops themselves provide context for Borealis's presence. This region became frozen through supernatural means following the Golden Order's campaign against the fire giants. The giants fell, God of Flame was defeated, its fire sealed within the forge of the giants, leaving the entire region locked in eternal winter. Dragons that inhabited this area would have faced a choice: flee to warmer climates or adapt to the new frozen reality. Borealis chose adaptation, or perhaps was forced into it by circumstances we can't fully understand. The result is a dragon perfectly suited to its environment, able to use the cold as both weapon and defense. In this frozen wasteland, Borealis's fog attacks become even more devastating, the extreme cold amplifying frostbite effects, while normal fire attacks from opponents prove less effective against a creature that has embraced ice. The strategic implications of Borealis's positioning deserve attention. The dragon guards key areas within the mountaintops, effectively controlling access to certain locations. Like other dragons who position themselves as gatekeepers, Borealis serves as a test, a challenge that players must overcome to progress. But unlike dragons guarding human locations, Borealis defends a region where few humans dare to venture, suggesting motivations beyond simple territory or treasure. The contrast between Borealis and the scarlet rot dragons of Caelid could hardly be starker. Where Borealis embraced cold through what seems like deliberate adaptation, the rot dragons suffered corruption forced upon them by Millennia's catastrophic bloom during her battle with Radahn. The rot wasn't something these dragons chose or welcomed, but rather an affliction that invaded their bodies and transformed them against their will. Decaying Exyx serves as the primary example of rot corruption among dragons, though other dragons in Caelid show similar signs of decay. The rot has eaten into Exyx's flesh, creating visible wounds and discoloration across the dragon's body. But rather than simply weakening the dragon, the rot has been weaponized, transformed from pure affliction into something that can be used offensively. Exyx's breath attack inflicts scarlet rot buildup rather than simple damage, turning the dragon's corruption into a contagious weapon. This represents a darker form of adaptation than Borealis's transformation. Where Borealis seems to have willingly integrated with cold, Exyx was forced to integrate with corruption, turning a death sentence into a survival tool through sheer draconic resilience. The psychological toll of rot corruption appears significant. Exyx stations itself specifically at the Cathedral of Dragon Communion, attacking anyone who approaches. This behavior suggests that the dragon hasn't forgotten what Dragon Communion represents. That despite physical corruption, mental faculties remain intact enough to recognize and hate those who would consume dragon hearts. The rot hasn't destroyed Exyx's mind, only twisted it alongside the dragon's body. We can infer from Exyx's example that dragons possess extraordinary resistance to corruption, far beyond what most creatures could endure. The scarlet rot kills most beings quickly, reducing them to mindless revenants or simply destroying them entirely. That Exyx not only survives but remains functional and dangerous demonstrates the incredible durability inherent to draconic constitution. Other dragons in Caelid show varying degrees of rot affliction, from minor discoloration to severe decay. This variation suggests that different dragons have reacted differently to rot exposure, some resisting more successfully than others. The factors determining who corrupts and how severely remain unclear, though proximity to rot pools and duration of exposure likely play roles. The fact that rot-afflicted dragons remain in Caelid rather than fleeing to cleaner regions raises questions. Are they physically unable to leave, their corruption binding them to the rotted land? Do they choose to remain, perhaps hoping to claim territory abandoned by dragons who fled? Or has the rot affected their judgment, making them unable to recognize the benefits of relocation? Different dragons might have different answers to these questions. The relationship between environmental corruption and draconic adaptation reveals the double-edged nature of dragon resilience. Their ability to survive extreme conditions and integrate environmental forces allows them to thrive in circumstances that would destroy lesser creatures. But this same adaptability can trap them, forcing integration with corruption or elements they would never choose under normal circumstances. Borealis might have preferred to remain a fire dragon, and Exarches certainly never desired rot corruption. From a combat perspective, both frost and rot dragons present unique challenges. Frost dragons require awareness of frostbite buildup and the lingering fog hazards that persist after breath attacks. Rot dragons force constant monitoring of scarlet rot accumulation, with the status effects percentage-based damage threatening even heavily armored opponents. Both elemental variants demonstrate that dragons remain dangerous regardless of their specific abilities, their physical power sufficient to devastate opponents even before considering their breath weapons. The incantations derived from these dragons preserve their unique powers for human use. Borealis's mist allows practitioners to exhale freezing fog, granting humans access to the same area denial capabilities that make Borealis so dangerous. Exarches' decay and the various scarlet rot dragon breaths similarly allow humans to inflict corruption, though without the personal cost of actual rot affliction. These elemental dragons demonstrate that the draconic species continues to evolve and adapt even in the current age. They're not simply remnants of an ancient civilization slowly fading into extinction, but living creatures responding to environmental pressures through transformation and integration. This ongoing evolution ensures that dragons remain relevant forces in the lands between, rather than becoming obsolete relics of a vanished era. The tragic dimension of these transformations shouldn't be overlooked. Borealis likely didn't choose to abandon fire for frost, but was forced to by environmental catastrophe. Exarches certainly didn't volunteer for rot corruption, but had it thrust upon them. Both dragons survive and even thrive in their transformed states, but at the cost of their original nature. They represent success through compulsory adaptation, endurance purchased by fundamental change. Understanding frost and rot dragons means recognizing that dragons in Elden Ring aren't a monolithic species, but rather a diverse collection of beings capable of radical transformation. They can integrate elemental forces, survive corruption that would destroy most creatures, and continue fighting even when their bodies are literally decaying around them. This durability and adaptability explain how dragons have survived the fall of their civilization and the rise of human dominance. They simply refuse to die, transforming themselves as necessary to endure whatever catastrophes befall the world. Dragon Communion, a dark ritual. Of all the rituals and practices in the lands between, few carry such profound consequences as Dragon Communion. This ancient tradition, established by Dragon Lord Placidusax himself as revenge against Baal the Dread, offers humans the seductive promise of draconic power at a cost that eventually consumes everything the practitioner once was. Understanding Dragon Communion requires examining its origins, mechanics, and the terrible transformations it inflicts on those who embrace it too eagerly. The ritual's establishment traces back to the battle between Placidusax and Baal. After their catastrophic confrontation ended in mutual injury, and Baal's flight to the Land of Shadow, Placidusax created Dragon Communion as a form of calculated vengeance. Rather than attempting to hunt Baal personally or sending armies of ancient dragons, the Dragon Lord established a system that would turn human ambition into a weapon against Baal's descendants. Fortissax, an ancient dragon loyal to Placidusax, took human form to serve as the primary agent of this plan. As the Dragon Communion priestess, Fortissax taught humans how to hunt drakes and consume their hearts, promising power beyond mortal limits to those who participated. This wasn't charity or altruism, but calculated strategy, using human greed to perpetuate violence against Baal's bloodline, while Placidusax himself remained in his storm beyond time. The mechanics of Dragon Communion are deceptively simple. a hunter kills a dragon, claiming its heart as a trophy. They then bring this heart to a dragon communion altar, typically located near the corpse of an ancient dragon, and consume it in a ritual setting. The heart, which continues beating even after removal from the dragon's body, transfers draconic power to the consumer, granting them abilities that transcend human limitations. But describing the process as simple obscures the profound biological and metaphysical changes involved. Dragon hearts aren't merely food or fuel, they're repositories of draconic essence, containing not just power, but fragments of dragon nature itself. When a human consumes a dragon heart, they don't just gain abilities, they incorporate dragon into their very being, beginning a transformation that starts subtly but eventually becomes complete and irreversible. The initial changes are minor. Practitioners gain the ability to use dragon communion incantations, channeling draconic power through their human forms. After consuming 4 hearts, their eyes change, developing vertical pupils and a golden glow that marks them as different from normal humans. This alteration is visible and permanent, a physical sign that can be temporarily hidden through cosmetic magic, but never truly removed. But the transformation doesn't stop with eyes. As practitioners consume more dragon hearts, as they continue participating in dragon communion, the changes accelerate. Their bodies begin to shift, taking on draconic characteristics. Scales appear on skin, claws replace fingernails. Internal structures adapt to support increasing physical power. The human form gradually gives way to something else, something caught between human and dragon. The most insidious aspect of dragon communion is the hunger it creates. Item descriptions and dialogue make clear that practitioners develop an increasing appetite for dragon hearts. What begins as calculated decision-making, consciously choosing to gain power through communion, gradually becomes compulsion. The practitioner doesn't just want more hearts, they need them, craving draconic essence with an intensity that overrides reason and self-preservation. This hunger represents a form of addiction, but one with fundamental metaphysical consequences. It's not merely psychological dependence, but biological imperative. The practitioner's transforming body, demanding the dragon essence necessary to complete its metamorphosis. Resisting this hunger becomes increasingly difficult as transformation progresses, until eventually resistance becomes impossible and the practitioner surrenders to their need. The final stage of dragon communion transformation is well documented and universally tragic: the creation of a magma worm. These creatures, once human heroes who sought power through dragon hearts, have been completely transformed into dragon-like beings with pitifully small wings, incapable of flight, cursed to crawl on their bellies for the rest of their existence. They retain enough human consciousness to suffer from their condition, but not enough to resist or reverse it. Magma worms exemplify the ultimate cost of dragon communion. The practitioner sought dragon power and received it, but at the price of everything that made them human. Their form has become monstrous, their minds reduced to animalistic drives, their former aspirations and relationships lost forever. They achieved their goal of becoming more than human, but discovered too late that more than human doesn't necessarily mean better than human. The tragic irony of magma worm transformation doesn't end there. Once transformed, these former humans become viable targets for dragon communion themselves. Their hearts, now bearing draconic essence, can be consumed by other practitioners seeking power. The hunter becomes the hunted, and the cycle of consumption continues, each generation of dragon communion practitioners unknowingly moving toward the same fate that claimed their predecessors. The altars where dragon communion takes place are always positioned near the corpse of a massive dragon, usually an ancient one. The Church of Dragon Communion in Limgrave, the Cathedral of Dragon Communion in Caelid, and the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion in the Land of Shadow all follow this pattern. These locations aren't merely symbolic. The proximity to dead dragons seems necessary for the ritual, perhaps drawing on residual draconic power to facilitate the transformation process. The Dragon Communion seal, used by practitioners bears a crest depicting the sacrificial devouring of hearts. Its description notes that dragon communion is too primal in nature for the term incantation to be appropriate. This suggests that dragon communion operates according to different rules than other magic systems, tapping into fundamental forces that predate civilized understanding of magical theory. Different dragon communion incantations offer varied abilities, each corresponding to a specific dragon or type of dragon. Aghil's flame grants fire breath. Exika's decay inflicts scarlet rot. Borealis's mist creates freezing fog. Each incantation represents not just a technique, but a fragment of the original dragon's essence, preserved and made accessible to human practitioners. The most powerful dragon communion incantation comes from consuming the heart of Baal itself. This heart, seized from the dread dragon after his defeat, grants access to Baal's tyranny, an incantation of legendary power. But the heart's description warns that it continues to resist even after consumption, its fire gradually consuming the practitioner from within. Eventually, this fire will overwhelm them entirely, ensuring that even defeating Baal doesn't provide true victory over his legacy. The social and political implications of dragon communion have shaped cultures across the lands between. The practice was originally encouraged by Placidusax and his followers, creating entire societies of Drake warriors dedicated to hunting Baal's descendants. But as the original purpose faded from memory, dragon communion became simply a path to power, practitioners forgetting why they hunted dragons and remembering only the strength communion provided. Some individuals actively resist dragon communion, despite understanding its power. Ura, hunter of bloody fingers, abstains from consuming dragon hearts, possibly because he once participated and barely escaped transformation. His warnings about dragon communion carry weight precisely because he understands its temptations firsthand. Yet, his resistance also demonstrates that dragon communion isn't inevitable, that conscious choice can prevent transformation if maintained consistently. The ethical dimensions of dragon communion raise uncomfortable questions. Is it justified to hunt dragons for power? Do dragons have rights that humans should respect? Is transformation into a magma worm a fitting punishment for the hubris of seeking draconic power? Or is it a tragic fate that befalls well-meaning individuals who simply didn't understand the consequences? The game doesn't provide clear moral judgment, allowing players to participate in dragon communion without explicit condemnation, but also depicting its consequences honestly. The Tarnished can consume dragon hearts freely, gaining tremendous power in the process. But they never complete the transformation into a magma worm, presumably because gameplay considerations prevent such a drastic, permanent change. This creates a disconnect between player experience and lore, where players benefit from dragon communion without suffering its ultimate costs. The relationship between dragon communion and other power-seeking rituals in the lands between reveals common patterns. The Tarnished seeks great runes and Elden Lord status. Blood. Practitioners seek communion with the formless mother. Frenzied flame cultists seek the burning away of all division. Dragon communion represents simply another path to transcendence, one that trades humanity for power in ways comparable to these other transformative practices. Understanding dragon communion means recognizing it as both practical power source and cautionary tale. It offers genuine strength, abilities that can reshape battles and transform users into forces of devastation. But it also demands terrible prices, changing practitioners fundamentally until they're no longer recognizable as what they once were. The ritual represents Placidusax's most enduring legacy, a revenge that continues perpetuating itself long after the Dragon Lord's retreat, a trap baited with power that continues claiming victims who think they'll be different from all who came before. The Magma Wyrms, fallen dragon warriors. The magma worms represent the ultimate cautionary tale of dragon communion, living monuments to ambition, corrupted, and transformation taken to its terrible conclusion. These creatures, once human heroes who sought power through consuming dragon hearts, now exist as twisted parodies of dragons, trapped in forms that grant strength while inflicting eternal suffering. Understanding the magma worms requires examining both their tragic origins and their current existence as some of the most pathetic yet dangerous creatures in the lands between. The transformation from human to magma worm doesn't happen suddenly. It's a gradual process of corruption and metamorphosis, each consumed dragonheart pushing the practitioner further from humanity and closer to draconic form. The progression follows a consistent pattern. First the eyes change, then scales begin appearing on skin, then skeletal structure shifts to accommodate growing mass and developing claws. By the time the transformation becomes obvious to others, it's already far too late for reversal. The physical form of a fully transformed magma worm reflects their transitional nature. They possess draconic bodies with thick scaled hides, powerful legs, and elongated tails. Their heads have become reptilian, bearing resemblance to dragons while retaining subtle hints of their former human structure. Most notably, they sport pathetically small wings, vestigial limbs far too small to support flight, forever grounding them despite their draconic transformation. This inability to fly represents the cruelest aspect of their curse. Dragons are defined by flight, by their mastery of the skies and freedom from terrestrial limitations. Magma worms are denied this fundamental aspect of draconic existence, forced to crawl on their bellies like serpents, despite having achieved dragon-like forms. They sought to become dragons and succeeded only in becoming mockeries of dragons, beings that embody draconic power while being denied draconic grace. The internal experience of being a magma worm remains largely mysterious, but we can infer certain things from their behavior and from item descriptions. They retain enough consciousness to remember what they were, enough intelligence to feel the loss of their humanity, but not enough reason to understand what they've become or how to cope with it. This limited awareness transforms their existence into perpetual confusion and suffering. Their combat behavior demonstrates both retained skill and degraded capacity. Magma worms fight with techniques that show traces of former human tactical thinking, using their environment, employing varied attack patterns, and adjusting strategies based on opponent behavior. But these sophisticated responses coexist with bestial rage and simplified motivations, creating creatures that are simultaneously more and less than their component parts suggest. The magma that gives magma worms their name represents another aspect of their transformation. These creatures wield molten rock as a weapon, breathing it like fire breath or causing it to erupt from the ground. This affinity for magma suggests that their transformation incorporated not just draconic elements, but geological ones, their bodies adapting to integrate earth and fire in ways that pure dragons don't demonstrate. Different named magma worms encountered throughout the game showcase how individual variation persists even in corrupted forms. Some fight with more obvious skill, suggesting they were particularly accomplished warriors before transformation. Others seem more bestial, perhaps having lost more of their humanity in the process. These differences imply that transformation affects different individuals differently, or that starting characteristics influence final outcomes. Great Worm Theodorix provides a unique example of non-human dragon communion corruption. This magma worm was originally a troll, specifically a hero of the war against the giants, who participated in dragon communion and suffered the same transformation that afflicts humans. Theodorix's existence proves that the curse of dragon communion isn't species-specific, but affects any being who consumes dragon hearts without proper safeguards. The question of whether magma worms can reproduce remains unanswered. We never observe young magma worms or evidence of breeding. This could mean they're sterile, their transformed bodies incapable of producing viable offspring. Or it could mean their reproduction occurs in ways we don't observe, perhaps through some draconic method inherited from their corrupted state. If they can breed, it raises disturbing questions about whether their offspring would be born as magma worms, or if some other form would result. The geographical distribution of magma worms reveals interesting patterns. They inhabit locations associated with lava and volcanic activity, Mount Gelmir, the Volcano Manor region, and similar geological features. Whether they seek out these locations because they're drawn to environments matching their magma affinity, or whether they create such environments through their presence, isn't entirely clear. Probably it's both, a feedback loop where magma worms transform their surroundings while being attracted to locations already possessing suitable characteristics. The relationship between magma worms and actual dragons varies from indifference to hostility. Dragons seem to recognize magma worms as corrupted former humans rather than genuine draconic kin, treating them accordingly. This rejection must be psychologically devastating for magma worms, who retain enough awareness to understand they sought to become dragons, but instead became something dragons themselves don't acknowledge. From a combat perspective, magma worms present interesting challenges. Their large bodies and powerful physical attacks make them dangerous in close combat, while their magma manipulation creates hazardous environments that restrict movement and positioning. But they're also slow and predictable compared to actual dragons, their cursed forms limiting agility and tactical options. Victory against magma worms typically requires patience and careful positioning rather than the desperate mobility demanded by true dragon encounters. The weapons obtained from magma worms carry special significance. The magma worm's scale zord specifically notes that its wielder was a champion of their land who drove back the giants. This description reveals that at least some magma worms were genuinely heroic figures before transformation, warriors who protected their people and achieved great deeds. Their fall from hero to monster becomes even more tragic when we understand what they once were and what they might have continued to be. The existence of multiple magma worms throughout the lands. Between suggests that Dragon Communion has claimed many victims over the years. These aren't isolated cases of individual foolishness, but rather a systematic problem, a predictable consequence, of a ritual that promises power without adequately warning about its true costs. The fact that new practitioners continue emerging despite the visible evidence of magma worms demonstrates either ignorance of the consequences or belief that they'll somehow avoid the fate that claimed others. The Dragon Communion priestess, Fortissax, continues encouraging dragon hunting and heart consumption despite knowing the end result for most practitioners. This suggests either callousness about human welfare or commitment to Placidusax's original purpose that overrides concern for individual practitioners. She serves the Dragon Lord's revenge, and if that requires transforming humans into magma worms, so be it. Some item descriptions suggest that the transformation can be temporarily halted, or even partially reversed through specific means. The rock heart, consumed in the ancient original form of Dragon Communion, transforms the user into an ancient dragon rather than a magma worm. This implies that different forms of communion produce different results, and that knowledgeable practitioners might be able to shape their transformation rather than simply surrendering to it. The ancient dragon man found in the Land of Shadow represents what might be considered a successful Dragon Communion transformation. Rather than becoming a magma worm, this individual achieved something closer to true draconic form while retaining enough human consciousness to remain functional. The fact that he ultimately sided with Baal rather than Placidusax suggests that successful transformation might produce beings who don't feel loyalty to the Dragon Lord who orchestrated the entire system. The broader implications of magma worm existence extend beyond individual tragedy. They represent a warning about the dangers of seeking power without understanding consequences, about transformation pursued without consideration for what might be lost. They embody the principle that becoming more than human doesn't guarantee becoming better than human. That power gained through fundamental change might not be worth the cost. Yet, magma worms also demonstrate the incredible resilience of former Dragon Communion practitioners. Despite their cursed forms and limited consciousness, they survive and even thrive in hostile environments. They remain dangerous opponents, capable of killing skilled warriors. They've adapted to existence in forms that should be unlivable, finding ways to function despite profound transformation. This resilience is admirable, even as the transformation itself remains horrific. Understanding magma worms means recognizing them as both monsters and victims. They're dangerous creatures that must be fought and killed, threats to anyone who encounters them. But they're also tragic figures, humans who made terrible choices or were led astray by promises of power, who now exist in states of perpetual suffering with no hope of recovery or redemption. They represent Placidusax's revenge achieving its fullest expression, humans transformed into weapons against dragons, while simultaneously serving as warnings about the price of draconic ambition. Conclusion: the legacy of dragons. As our journey through the Age of Dragons draws to a close, we find ourselves confronting a legacy as complex and multifaceted as the dragons themselves. From Dragon Lord Placidusax, waiting eternally in his storm beyond time, to the corrupted magma worms crawling through volcanic caverns, from the glorious, ancient dragons who ruled the world to the lesser drakes who survive in their diminished shadow. The story of dragons in Elden Ring is ultimately a story about power, transformation, and the inexorable passage of time. The dragons of the lands between were never simply monsters to be slain or obstacles to overcome. They represented an entire cosmic order, a way of organizing reality that preceded human civilization and that shaped the very foundations of the world. The Age of Dragons wasn't merely a historical period, but a fundamentally different arrangement of power and possibility, when beings of living stone commanded lightning and built cities among the clouds. Their fall from supremacy came not through single catastrophic defeat, but through accumulated losses and transformations. Baal's betrayal fractured draconic unity. The disappearance of Placidusax's god removed the divine mandate that legitimized dragon rule. The war with the Golden Order demonstrated that humans, properly organized and divinely backed, could challenge even the mightiest ancient dragons. Each of these factors contributed to the transition from Age of Dragons to Age of the Erdtree. Yet even in defeat and decline, dragons maintained relevance and power. The ancient dragon cult preserved draconic knowledge and techniques, allowing humans to wield lightning and access perspectives beyond normal mortal limitations. Dragon Communion, despite its terrible costs, offered genuine power to those desperate or ambitious enough to pursue it. Individual dragons like Fortissax and Lansseax formed meaningful relationships with humans, demonstrating that cooperation between species remained possible even after war. The various dragon types we encounter, ancient dragons, lesser dragons, glintstone dragons, frost dragons, rot dragons, each represents a different form of adaptation to changing circumstances. Dragons as a species proved remarkably flexible, capable of integrating new powers, surviving in hostile environments, and continuing their existence even as their civilization crumbled. This adaptability explains why dragons persist in the current age rather than having gone extinct like so many other ancient beings. The tragedy of dragons lies in their inability to reclaim what they once had. Placidusax can wait eternally, but his god will never return. Ancient dragons can master new forms of magic, but they'll never rebuild Farum Azula or restore the Age of Dragons. Dragon Communion practitioners can gain draconic power, but they'll never truly become dragons, only twisted approximations that satisfy neither human nor draconic ideals. The relationship between dragons and humans remains defined by this fundamental power imbalance. Humans hunt dragons for their hearts, study them for magical knowledge, fight them for glory and survival. Dragons can resist, can kill individual humans with ease, but can never restore the dominance they once held. They're powerful but ultimately subordinate, dangerous but contained, magnificent but diminished. Yet there's something admirable about draconic persistence. They refuse to simply die out or fade away. They adapt, transform, integrate new powers, and continue existing despite all disadvantages. Whether we're discussing Placidusax's eternal vigil, Greyoll's protective devotion to her children, or even the magma worm's survival in their cursed forms, dragons demonstrate a commitment to existence that transcends rational calculation of cost and benefit. The magical and spiritual legacy of dragons extends throughout the lands between. Every dragon cult incantation channels ancient, draconic power. Every dragon communion ritual perpetuates Placidusax's revenge. Every ancient dragon smithing stone carries temporal distortion inherited from the Dragon Lord himself. Dragons have become integrated into the very fabric of reality, their influence persisting even where their physical presence has dwindled. The various endings available to players in Elden Ring all occur in a world shaped by dragon history, regardless of which cosmic order ultimately triumphs. Whether the Golden Order restored, the Age of Stars initiated, or the frenzied flame unleashed, the foundational fact of the world remains. Dragons once ruled here, and their reign shaped everything that followed. Understanding current events requires understanding this draconic foundation. The future of dragons in the lands between remains uncertain. Will they continue adapting and evolving, finding new ways to persist as circumstances change? Will they gradually dwindle, each generation weaker than the last until none remain? Or will some catalyst arise that allows dragon civilization to rebuild, restoring them to relevance if not dominance? The game provides no answer, leaving dragon futures as ambiguous as so much else in Elden Ring's narrative. What we can say with certainty is that the Age of Dragons, though ended, has never truly been forgotten. Its legacy persists in magic, in geography, in the very structure of reality. Every lightning strike carries an echo of ancient dragon power. Every time someone looks upon Lansseax's massive corpse impaled through Lanesdale, they remember when dragons could breach even the mightiest fortifications. Every magma worm serves as a warning about the costs of seeking draconic power without wisdom or restraint. The dragons of Elden Ring teach us about the inevitability of change and the impossibility of permanence. No matter how powerful, no matter how ancient, no civilization lasts forever. The Age of Dragons ended, just as the Age of the Erdtree must eventually end, just as whatever age follows will itself eventually give way to something new. Power shifts, cosmic orders rise and fall, and even the mightiest beings eventually face obsolescence or transformation. Yet they also teach us about resilience and adaptation. Dragons could have simply died out when their age ended, could have refused to adapt and faded into extinction. Instead, they transform themselves, finding new powers, forming new relationships, carving out new niches in a world that no longer belonged to them. This flexibility, this refusal to accept defeat as final, this commitment to continued existence regardless of circumstances, represents perhaps their greatest strength. The story of dragons in Elden Ring is ultimately a story about us as well. We face our own transitions, our own obsolescence, our own need to adapt to circumstances beyond our control. We pursue power and transformation, sometimes without fully understanding the costs involved. We form relationships across divides that seem insurmountable. We struggle with the tension between what we were and what we're becoming. In the dragon's struggles, we see reflections of our own. In their tragedies, we find warnings about our own potential fates. In their victories, however limited, we find hope that adaptation and persistence can overcome even the most complete defeats. They were the rulers of an age long past, and now they're survivors in an age that has moved beyond them. Yet they remain powerful and dangerous, magnificent and terrible, carrying forward a legacy that began before human memory, and that will likely continue long after human civilization has itself become ancient history. The Age of Dragons has ended. Long live the Age of Dragons. Thank you for joining me on this epic journey through Elden Ring's draconic history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of the Lands Between's most ancient beings, please like and subscribe to RPG Lore Dream. We have many more adventures planned, exploring the hidden stories and forgotten histories that make these game worlds so rich and fascinating. Until next time, fellow adventurers, may you find your own worth in the waking world.